Parker when I was a little guy. And I was very curious about that name, knowing that our name really wasn't Parker. That's an English name. So that's what got me on this track and pursuing what it is that, down through the genealogy. It's taken me decades to kind of piece the puzzle together, to make that determination, make those ties, and it's been interesting for me. But you see, the problem is this. I'm looking at my father's name. I'm going down going the patriarch side, and that was going in the wrong direction. That's taken me decades. I should have been going down my mother's side because, you see, my mother, now deceased, was the clan mother of the Heron clan. I should have been going down my mother's side, but my mother's last name was Smith. So now it's going to take me another decades to go down the Smith line, and you can imagine where that's going to take me, right? But it was interesting, and the interesting point is that my grandfather, which I didn't know, my grandfather passed away when my dad was 11 years old. My dad was born in 1901. And as I looked at my grandfather, his name was Gaylord Parker. And as I went further back in time, my great-grandfather was William Otto Parker. After that, my great-great-grandfather was Levi Parker. So Levi was the brother of Ely Parker. And that's how my tie is with Ely. There were 5 boys in his family, and one girl, Caroline Parker. And of course, Ely's parents, or Levi's parents, they were William and Elizabeth Parker. So it was Ely's dad, William Parker, his 2 brothers, Samuel and Henry and William. They were the ones that took into the family a British officer. They kind of brought him in, friend, and they kind of adopted him. And wouldn't you know, his name was Gaylord Parker. And I followed that back, and I thought that was very interesting. But in that time period, probably around the 1700s, you see, we still had all those clan names. The clan names are still with us today. And it's performed in ceremony in the Longhouse. I carry an adult name. I did not have a child name because I was living in the city of Buffalo. But further on back, beyond William Parker, Elizabeth's father was Jimmy Johnson. So you see how these names are still influenced by the incoming colonies coming in here. And of course, that ties in with Handsome Lake. So we have ties with who we would call Gunyadayo in our language, Handsome Lake. And of course, Red Jacket was the uncle of Ely Parker. So we have quite a famous family, and I'm so proud that I can be here with you today because these are the original territories of not only the Seneca in the terms that you can understand, but in our terms, we're called Onontowaka. That's people of the Great Hill. And if you ever get to Ganondagan, how many know where Ganondagan is? Oh, great. How many have been to Ganondagan? Oh, good. Good to see that. That's the original homeland of quite large population of Senecas. All up and down the Genesee area, where it was heavily populated with Seneca villages. And then, of course, in time, the Senecas expanded, and of course went all the way up to, Lake Erie, down into Pennsylvania. And I got to say to you that the Six Nations had such great influence with their diplomacy that influenced some 35 tribal nations in the Northeast, had great influence, and also influenced your founding fathers. And proof of that you can find in the congressional resolution that acknowledges the Six Nations for their contributions to the United States Constitution. I think it was the 76th or 100th Congress, 76th resolution, something like that. If you want that, I can get that information for you. But it is to acknowledge what the founding fathers found within the people that they met with in the Haudenosaunee. And they were quite influential. There was a democracy well underway, well established, and they liked what they saw in that governance and the leaders that they were dealing with in Philadelphia, in Washington, in Albany, New York. They had great influence on Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington. And you can see those things that are visible today. And I mentioned early on in my trip down to Macedon that some of those things that you can see visible, I don't know if I can see one inside here, but at the top of the American flag sits an eagle. And part of my discussion is to just give you a little brief on what eagles, significance of eagles are here today. But also, I asked Mark to bring forth another item here. This little branch here is taken from the white pine, and there's Greek metaphor, and this is what some of the leaders were looking at and dealing with the leadership within the Haudenosaunee. This is what they saw. They saw the role of the leaders, the women leaders, in the balance and the harmony within our people. And like I say, they went behind closed doors, and women were not admitted. But they couldn't deal with that, see? And that's ancient in our tradition. There's a balance in our tradition. And it's based on, our entire philosophy is based on the principle of peace. And what I'm going to talk about just kind of briefly here is that I don't know if I can see one in the sight, but this is a story, an ancient story of ours that we were in conflict long time ago. I'm not going to specify a year because that seems to be a question, but the point is, a long time ago we were in conflict. Our people were fighting constant revenge, just a vicious cycle. War. And in our story, a man came to us from the other side of Lake Ontario. He came to us from the north. And he was sent by the Creator. He brought a message to our people, how to end this warring. We call him the peacemaker. And what he did over time is he had a helper. His name was Hiawatha. Some of you know the name Hiawatha in our language. Was his helper, and that peacemaker had some problems with here and with his speech, and Hiawatha became a spokesperson. And he brought that message to the warring factions, and he traveled throughout these territories, the very territories here. He traveled through here, and he had to be convincing of his message of peace. And he did. He brought that message. He laid out what we call the Gyanisha Goa, which is the great law of peace. That is our Constitution. We stand on that Constitution today. A lot of those principles are defined in the U.S. Constitution. And what he did was there were 50 leaders together. And there was one wicked person that was pretty much dominating in the Onondaga territories. And his name was Taradaho. And his hair was full of snakes. He was an evil man. And he was feared by all. And the peacemaker in Hiawatha had to convince this man of this message of peace. And it was Jagunsasa, Mother of Nations, that they brought this message to Taradaho. They convinced him that there was a need to bring our people together, to become of one mind. And what he did was, he brought these leaders together over time, and it had to be by consensus. There was no voting. There were no elections. And those leaders, all those leaders that convened, they're put up by the mothers, by the clan mothers. So what he did was, he brought them together at Onondaga Lake, and he uprooted a white pine tree. And he convinced the leaders of the Confederacy at the time to cast their weapons of war into the abyss forever. So that symbol that you can see in various places is the white pine. And when they cast those weapons of war, out of that came that saying, bury the hatchet. And what they did was to cast their weapons of war into the abyss, and the peacemaker then planted the white pine tree. And beneath the white pine, you'll find 4 white roots of peace. They extend into 4 sacred directions. And that those roots are extended for those to come and take shelter under that tree. It's a great metaphor. That tree, and I brought this little branch here to illustrate to you that it's quite significant. And atop that tree sits the eagle. And that eagle is to be, to watch for approaching danger. So eagles are very significant, not only in the Six Nations, but throughout the land share, indigenous people. Now the white pine, and you can come and look at this branch, and some of you probably have maybe white pine close to where you live. But if you take a shoot, take an individual shoot, you'll find 5 needles, a cluster of 5 needles. That is significant of the 5 original nations. And if you look closer to a needle, you see it has a white stripe in it. That's peace. And the white pine was chosen because, you see, the pine is green throughout the year. That signifies that peace shall become for all of us, for all times. It's green all year long. It doesn't change like the other types. But if you look at a white pine, it kind of doesn't have like a Christmas tree shape. It's shaped a little bit differently, but I've seen illustrations that use a Christmas tree shape with an eagle on the top. But like I say, some of those symbols have been drawn from our principles we stand on. But I couldn't help but notice, looking at a white pine, it has a little bit of a sheen to it, other than the green, like an evergreen. And it's that little white tracer up that needle. So, sometime, this afternoon I'll leave this up here if you want to take a closer look at a white pine. And that's the significance of the tree of peace, we call it. And it's quite a metaphor because, as I mentioned, that peacemaker planted that tree, and that's the principle that we stand on today, the principle of peace. And it's a simple statement for all people of the world, is to put your weapons away. We're at conflict today. Our veterans are overseas. I served in the United States Marine Corps. I served this country. Our natives, our people, have served in all wars that the United States took part in. We have the highest percentage of recruitment, enrollment in armed forces of this country. So that message is quite simple. The need to put the weapons away. We are at such a point in time of total destruction that there's a great need for us to come together, because your descendants are not from this continent. Of course, you call this home. We've taken you in as neighbors and friends. And you're not going back home. You're here to stay. So there is a great need to come together. And that's one of the principles in our teaching, is that when those leaders put the weapons away, the principle was to arrive at consensus. And we work on the principle of consensus, the original traditional people of the Six Nations. That means that when our leaders come together in Grand Council in Syracuse, that means that an issue that's brought forth to Grand Council, those leaders have to agree 100%